Welcome. My name is Robert Grupa, and in this session, I'll be talking about neurodiversity in the workplace, navigating the manager-employee relationship. Have you ever wondered about neurodiversity for adults in the context of the workplace? Or are you interested in what might be some best practices and guidance for employer managers and also as individuals? This presentation looks to aim to provide a personal perspective as a neurodiverse individual employee and also as an experienced manager leading neurodiverse teams. In this session, I'm going to go through a brief history of neurodiversity and its significance, the benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace, strategies for managers to attract, develop, and support neurodiverse talent, and effective communication techniques and support mechanisms for neurodiverse employees. So let's start off by what do we mean by neurodiversity in the context of this presentation. Neurodiversity is a framework that has multiple mental and neurological conditions combined into them. And so some of them shown here as a summary are dyscalculia, which is difficulty with calculating or doing mathematics, but it also plays to strengths. So people with this type of condition are also have strong skills in verbal and intuition. Dyspraxia has to do with physical conditions, and their strengths are in innovation and intuition. Dyslexia has to do with reading. Strengths are in visualization and 3D coordination. Autism is about learning, communication, and behavior, but also has matching strengths then with being able to concentrate and processing information. ADHD has difficulty with focus and impulse control, but has high energy and passion. Tourette's has involuntary sounds and movement tics, but the strengths there are observational and creativity. So this is a huge field. So forgive me, I'm only going to really kind of be touching upon ADHD and autism simply because that's my own personal experience and working relationships that I've had the most experience with. But there are others that, people can reference that have much more experience and able to address other conditions. When we look overall here, sorry, I forgot to advance that portion. You look at how prevalent is this, and we look at throughout history, there are many celebrities, men and women. So a lot of these conditions, sometimes people think they're more male related, but you see Marie Curie, for instance, Agatha Christie, Oprah Winfrey, right? Names that you wouldn't even necessarily associate with some of these conditions, but yet they actually do have them. And again, they're using their strengths to compensate for those professionally. When we look at challenges of neurodiversity in the workplace, it comes down to 75% from various studies of neurodiverse talent is really hiding their condition because they're embarrassed. They fear recrimination and discrimination fears. So don't self-identify. Then you have 64% of managers have admitted that they have a limited understanding of these differences, or maybe not at all. And so therefore, as a result, 50% of them feel that, they're not qualified or they wouldn't know how to deal with neurodiverse individuals within their team. Overall, this leads to the need for both managers and employees. They need encouragement, support, and training to be able to create inclusive and highly productive workspaces and teams. So let's play a little fun little check-in game. You might be neurodiverse if. So the issue with a lot of these is that these are hidden conditions. So these are just some indications. And You don't have to have all of them to meet a condition. So I'm just going to read through some of these and just ask yourself or about others that you know. So ADHD has difficulties paying attention. So do you find it hard to stay focused on tasks or activities? What about impulsiveness? Do you feel that you frequently act on impulse without thinking things through? Restlessness. Do you feel restless and fidgety even when you need to stay still? Forgetfulness. Do you forget often appointments, commitments, or daily tasks? Procrastination. Do you like to put off tasks until the last minute? Disorganization. Do you struggle with keeping your living space or workspace well organized? I'm chuckling at myself. No. So I mix them up, right? So, I could argue both sides of this equation. And so can you, right? Difficulties completing tasks. Do you start many projects but then have difficulties finishing them? Chronic lateness. Are you always late for appointments or events? Are you one of those friends where your friends start telling you an earlier time than you should really be there? This is one we've done with some of our friends. Excessive talking. Do you find yourself talking a lot and other people are having a hard time interrupting? Do you have difficulties with emotional regulation issues? Difficulty managing your own emotions or experiencing mood swings? So if you have a combination of those, you might be ADHD if you don't already know. Taking a look at autism. Do you have difficulties with social interactions? Understand what others are thinking or feeling? Do you have anxiety in social conditions? Do you feel uncomfortable? Do you have difficulty making friends and keeping friends? Preferences for solitude. Do you like to spend time alone rather than with others? What about literal understanding? Do you take what other people say at face value and then you have difficulty sometimes understanding jokes or sarcasm, various idioms? Do you prefer a routine? You want every day to be the same, and do you feel anxious when that routine is disrupted? Sensory sensitivity. Are you sensitive to lights, sound, or maybe touch? Do you have difficulty expressing your emotions? You find it challenging to tell other people how you feel? Social interest. Do you get specialized interests? So do you find a topic or an interest and then you just really dive into these niche topics and you're very focused? Are you inflexible and have fear of change? So do you find it difficult to adapt to changing conditions? Or do you like things when they stay static and the same? So if those resonate with you, then there's some autistic traits that might be an indication that you have some of that condition. Now, within these conditions, or especially in autism is a spectrum. And so it can manifest itself in many different ways. So you have kind of high functioning, which Asperger's was a term that's been used for that, to be able to differentiate between more severe manifestations of the behavior. So let's take a look at some of these. So in autism, maybe delayed language development or lack of speech is an indication. And in Asperger's, they would have, say, normal to advanced language development. But again, part of the same autistic family, if you will, but its outcome is its manifestation is a bit different. Cognitive abilities. So in autism, those can go from an intellectual disability all the way to, say, genius or above average intelligence. So Asperger's usually has average to above intelligence. And then social interactions. So autism really hates any kind of social interaction at all. Asperger's has difficulties with them, but they often have the desire to engage with others. Motor skills, autism can have significant motor skill and coordination challenges, versus Asperger's might just be clumsy or motor skill difficulties in some skills. Repetitive behaviors. So with autism, very pronounced, other people notice these behaviors and routines. Asperger's can usually keep them, maybe smaller ones, and they're more regulated. Then sensory. Autism would have a heightened response to, say, bright lights or certain types of lights, sound or touch. And Asperger's, on the other hand, they would have some of that, but maybe less pronounced. It's less intense, or maybe not even obvious. A small one for me has been sound, which I have never considered an issue at all. But then as I think back on it, I used to be, as a child, really bothered by the sounds of lights. And of course, as you get older, you lose hearing that spectrum. So that kind of goes away over time. So anyway, kind of a weird little thing, but other people may not be sensitive to it. Diagnosis age. So autism is typically diagnosed early in childhood, but Asperger's, on the other hand, because it's higher functioning or less prevalent, it's later diagnosed later in childhood, or it manifests itself, I should say, more in adulthood. And then daily assistance. Autism may require significant daily assistance and support of others, versus Asperger's would be minimum, if any. They often live completely independently and successfully. Specialized interest. Autism, having specialized interest, but more varied and less intense. Asperger's, they have the intensity, and they're focused on specific topics as well. So again, just showing some of the spectrum within that. But the other thing I think interesting as well is that there are cultural implications as well. So what country or upbringing styles did people have? Was it very traditional? Was it more laissez-faire? I have German background and European background, so I oftentimes joke that in America, I'm an introvert, yet in Germany, I would be considered an extrovert. Then there are generational life stages. So we've all hear the joking about boomers, Xers, Z, Alpha, all the different generations and how they work or how they behave. And all of these could be misinterpreted or applied, whichever way you want to look at it, based on those differences as well. And the other thing to be key about as well is that medications can have an effect upon behavior. So one wants to kind of rule out which ones of those are neurotypical, neurodiverse behaviors that might be brought about due to medication effects as well. And on it goes. So what about myself? I kind of mentioned a couple things briefly, but when I was growing up, autism and all these other things were not on the radar at all, not something brought up in school. Neurodiversity in adults actually hasn't been well understood or an issue until, again, more recent history, being driven primarily through childhood education grants and funding, right? So the more people can be put into categories, then the more funding is available to address those type of needs. And also the U.S. Psychiatric Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, is also focused around conditions or diagnosis for children when it comes to autism and other pieces. So as a result, it's been really difficult to find adult assessment and diagnosis. And even if you do find it, it's expensive and costs thousands of dollars. So a quick example is that it can cost anywhere, say, from $1,500 to $3,000 or maybe more for a good diagnosis. And then the school districts, as an example, they quote about $5,000 to $8,000 per child to do assessments. So in my own journey, again, it never came up in school back then or in my adulthood. I was just kind of had special interests and was kind of one of those nerdy, geeky kids and leaned towards science and technology type things as well. And also English, but kind of editorial skills, if you will, like grammar and structure. But then as I went into having a family of my own, and for a number of years, for some of our, well, all of our children, but again, we didn't homeschool the whole time, but we did at various times. And so when we had done homeschooling, it became apparent to us in being able to help them with their lessons and all that, that there are variations in learning styles. So then we learned about auditory, kinesthetic, logical learning styles, right? And each of our children would have different ways that worked for them. Some kids had to have a fidgeter kind of thing and walk around and talk things out. Others had to have deep silence. So again, seeing the variation in those kind of brought that up. And about the same time when we had the young family and things like that, I began to notice as a manager as well that within the team dynamics, I worked in both technical fields and also in creative fields. And you have the difference of personality types within those. And also then I've worked in sales. And what's interesting to me is that you can have these neurodiverse personality types in each of those fields, even in sales. So people always think of them as very extroverted and that. But I had a team where I had my top two performers. One was a very strong introvert, and the other was the exact polar opposite, and neither one of them liked each other because one was way too loud, made too much of a drama, and the other one was just mousing away at their work and beavering away and still getting the same results as far as success in sales goes. And then in the technical field as well, presenting information. So in my journey of trying to figure out, well, what kind of a person am I and things like that, I found online back then at the time. I was really struggling, several decades ago. But there's a good online assessment. And you can see here, like my self-assessment. So I know all the psychologists are going to go nuts, or the professional counselors. They don't like self-administered stuff. Fine. But I think it's great for insights. And again, it's useful when you run it by family members, people that love and care for you as well. And then they can validate some of these and go, yes, that's exactly who you are. And this is what it says, or, well, I don't see that. But anyway, in my case, this one here, this assessment really kind of resonated. And then you be able to see some of these different aspects of your personality. And then as well, I bumped into a self-assessment for the Myers-Briggs. So the my type is INTJ, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. But you see some of these aspects of introvertedness versus energy and identity and all the rest of it. So these I found very helpful for myself. And again, by using these tools with others within my teams, it's helped me as a manager as well. So let's take a look at some of these in the context of neurodiversity at work. In looking at neurodiversity in the workplace, what we really see from various industry studies that have been published throughout the years is the ability to bring those neurotypical superpowers, or better than average skills, if you will, to bear in improve overall productivity overall of teams and organizations. So taking those superpowers of analytics, creativity, and focus. So with that, IBM has done a study where they've had over 1,400 members supporting neurodiversity in the workplace. Hewlett Packard has had showed increases of 30% more productive than non-diverse teams. Deloitte had a 2018 research about various companies and cultures, and found that teams with companies, organizations, cultures were 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile. And then, Morgan Chase also had done its Autism in the Workplace initiative, found that they had fewer errors and 90 to 140% productive than neurotypical employees. And organizations that provided mentors to professionals with disabilities reported a 16% increase in profitability, 18% in productivity, and 12% in customer loyalty. In practice, success in neurodiverse teams comes down to interpersonal relationships and communications. So with that, there's team dynamics of the double or triple empathy problem. And if we look over here at the diagram, you've got the autistic spectrum person who struggles to, say, read between the lines. What is the other person telling me, but what aren't they telling me? What are they implying? And they have this loop going on in their head. They also struggle with trying to overcome other people's conceptions about them, misconceptions about autism, and then also maybe struggling with managing any kind of sensory distractions. On the other hand, you have neurotypical people who are used to forming a first impression off of somebody. They don't necessarily recognize and understand autistic traits, and they have a difficult time imagining what these sensory difficulties might be. So therefore, both of them end up having difficulties communicating. With a team, you also then have a triple indemnity kind of issue, and where you could have a neurodiverse employee, a neurotypical manager, and then maybe you have a team where it's a percentage mix of those people as well. And then you have these different variations as well, right? Where what happens if you have a neurotypical, right? So not autistic person that's an employer reporting to a neurodiverse manager. And then again, in a team setting with maybe a mixture of some amount. Or when you have neurodiverse employees relating to neurodiverse managers. So in all of this is where a lot of stress builds up, because the corporate environment or any organizational environment can kind of be like a game of Survivor, the television show, right? Outwit, outplay, outlast. And there's all the social dynamics of the various office environments and social networking that really cause blindsides for people with autism and misunderstandings. So let's take a look at the opportunities and challenges of managers in the workplace, really looking to how do they attract, develop, and benefit from neurodiverse teams. So looking at appreciating the differences, adapting job descriptions and career paths appropriately, structuring communications, and providing reflection for neurodiverse individuals to respond, and leveraging mentors. So we'll talk about some of those elements. So the first part is identifying what type of teams and individuals does one have. And now the tools that I'm going to be talking about again, and here, like we're going to talk about DISC, these are ones where a lot of psychologists and HR consultants will say, "Oh, well, that's popular, meta science and no, pseudoscience and been disproved." Yes, I'm sure it has. However, nevertheless, many teams still use these tools, and they are still useful. And I've found them very good, because the real issue, it's about trying to replace them with more expensive research type current popularity within the psychology profession studies, but a lot of times those are expensive. So the accessibility to some of these other alternatives are not available to everybody, and also because they haven't been used out in the industry as much, they may not be as well known or maybe even as effective, right? So time will tell. But right now, I'm going to start with ones that are available and easily accessible without having any kind of large budgets. So that's the intent here. So William Moulton Marston came up with the DISC emotional and behavioral theory back in 1928. And they have these categories of D for dominance, inducement, submission, and compliance. So the DICS or SC. So these are useful for managers looking to understand the diverse talent. And really what you will see on these is that the autism traits will come out in the introversion aspect of it. And so we have that, and then also looking at the superpowers as the team. So usually with neurodiverse people, being able to fit them into these kind of pictures is useful, because some of them will have higher IQs or perform well on those type of tests. They're good at structural critical thinking, and what that helps teams do is that by being balanced, that it helps avoid any type of groupthink. So the real trick is, I think, with some of these is that teams will decide, especially in sales, if you will, right? They want everybody to be extroverted and all the rest of it. And so they'll choose people that are in a certain profile. But again, then you fall into the groupthink. And if you don't have people who are structured, then who's going to get the actual reporting and the organization and prioritization and delivery work done? So there's always tasks within every type of team that can draw upon these strengths that are needed. Another very useful tool you saw me highlight as well earlier was in 1944, there was a mother-daughter team of Catherine Briggs and Isabel Myers, who were really inspired by Carl Jung's 1921 book, The Psychological Types. And in World War II, they found a very big need there for getting more women into industrial jobs while the men were off fighting in the war. And they wanted to have an effective mechanism of being able to match various people to the jobs that were available. So the what would people be most effective in and be satisfied with, so that after they're trained, they're not leaving because that wasn't a good fit for them. So it is more involved than DISC. The DISC has the 4 types, but it provides better insights for teams, because what you can then do is look at the relationship between the different personality types and being able to adapt the work overall. Another tool that many companies use for performance management, skill gaps, development, and also identifying what are the traits that they would like for ideal jobs is the Lominger competency model and framework. So it's not always called that, right? Different teams will give it, or different organizations will rebrand it and use that. But this came from 1970s framework developed by a psychologist named David McClellan. And it gained a lot of momentum then when Robert Eichinger and Michael Lombardo then founded Lominger in 1991. and they came up with this 67 competency library, which has been used globally in many different organizations. So this looks to identify different skills and knowledge requirements that can then be used to assemble, if you will, and apply to various jobs. So it encompasses both hard and soft skills for successful job performance. So now this is a great tool to use, especially for one-on-ones as a manager and biannually, annually reviews. But it does need to be adapted because let's take, for instance, the builds networks. So that's one personally where I have a little bit of a struggle with it because my whole personality and things that I do are about one-on-one and about introversion and getting things done. So with that one, I usually score myself low in that, and it's an area of opportunity for growth. But at the end of the day, after decades of struggling with this, I'm beating myself up about being bad in one particular area, despite seeing it, despite knowing some of the strategies for improving. I'm probably not going to really conquer that and ever be a super great examples of that. So this can be abused as well by employers by saying, well, okay, but here's why you're not good enough to go up to the next level, instead of looking at the whole package. And you need to address these things. But research really shows that nobody's perfect. So where do you find that person? And even then, when they look at the most highly successful people, they leverage their strengths while having obvious flaws. Again, going back to that list of various celebrities on the autism spectrum and all that, nobody could ever doubt that Richard Branson or some of these other people, right, that they would score well in all these. So for your personal use, I think as an individual and also as managers, look at using this with a trusted mentor, right? So focus really on developing strengths that can be useful. And then identify potential problem areas. So look for incremental self-improvement. And then what I like to just kind of refer to as well as, God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's the Serenity Prayer, which was from 1932, Lutheran theologian, and is used by the YWCA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Hallmark greeting cards. Another tool, especially with autism spectrum with regards to one-on-ones, is having a structure to that. And so the SCARF model is from 2005 by David Rock, who wrote this as an article in the Business Harvard Review. And it was based on his synthesis of numerous research studies, and serves as a mnemonic for remembering the key social domains that drive human behavior in social interactions. So status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So in each one of these, looking at, what are some of the threats that somebody may see or makes them feel uneasy. And then how do we use each of these different areas to activate rewards, right? Or putting people at ease and making them motivated. So again, you can look up the SCARF model and use that, but many of you may be using it as already. So it is a good structure, but it needs to be adapted and tempered as well with active listening. So it's not just kind of a structure that you go through and we got 15 minutes and we're going to bang through this menu. You need to have empathy and compassion for the other person's styles. So again, looking at stress triggers or coping strategies that the other person may be trying to apply. Rephrasing some of the different topics or issues and items, and then being able to rephrase it back to validate that it was actually received. And then some of this, you may not be able to get through a whole SCARF model, say, with one sitting. So break it up where it's kind of losing engagement and effectiveness. Allow the other person to go away, take time to reflect, come back and kind of pick up from there. But you need to make that adjustment as well for the other person to be able to internalize and be able to interact. Because otherwise, they've just shut down and they're not going to hear the rest of it as well. So it's not a one and done. So, maybe in one, you only got through some of the different things. You've broken into digestible chunks, draw a line in that, pick it up later, and just iterate. And again, it's one of those things where you practice and you find how does it work. And again, it's a framework model. You don't use it in every single one-on-one, right? But it's there, and it is a tool that can be used by managers, and some organizations, they promote this more heavily than others. So remember, again, as a manager talking to neurodivergent staff, it's important to use direct language. They struggle with innuendo and body language, and so they may misinterpret something. So be direct. Just me personally, it's like, I've got thick skin. I am sensitive as well, but I'd rather hear it clearly than misinterpret something. Don't expect instant answers. A lot of times I kind of struggle because in the mind they start analyzing everything and they need to go able to process it. So they may need to understand the nuances of language. So you as a manager are trying to adapt there, but again, you may get feedback later and provide for that. The body language may be different. Some people stare off into space while they're thinking. It's not because they were breaking eye contact to be rude. Some people will have great eye contact, but that doesn't mean that their brain is really paying attention, right? It's just a coping mechanism. So there are many different forms that this can take, but don't rely upon that. So just understand there can be differences, and don't react negatively. You can provide feedback and say, I'm getting the sense that you're not really engaged in listening, because maybe the person is and they're intensely listening. So watch for signs of them becoming overloaded or overwhelmed. This, again, goes to that input, sensory input. They mean they have something else. You're having a sit-down meeting, and they're not used to not being able to move around, and so they're kind of losing the plot a bit. Questioning. So don't take it as an insult if they come back and ask you questions about what you're trying to present. Take the time to go over it in the detail. And again, maybe they aren't voicing things properly at the time because they're focused on what they're trying to resolve in their mind, not necessarily about the communication itself. So anyway, questioning is not a form of talking back. It's about helping to process that. And you will get emotion sometimes involved in there. That's okay. The main thing is to keep those dialogues open. It's when people shut down. That's the negative aspect. And then repeating the speaker isn't either. So sometimes neurotypical people will repeat back information that they've heard. And it's not being rude. It's not meant as mocking, right? Could be, but maybe not. And it's just a way that they are verbalizing and synthesizing information. So looking at guidelines for success and making sure the other person retains the information and processes it, chunk your content, repeat the information, set clear expectations with strong, physical examples, if you will. That really helps a lot of times. Give explicit feedback. Again, not just in general, like, well, you're rude with a lot of people. Just be like, then give them an example. Like the other day in the lunchroom, somebody came up and said, oh, sorry, whatever. And then you reacted in a certain way. So what was going on there? So give an exact time and example of that. That can help with these. And then build opportunities to revisit various topics, especially, again, as a manager, if there's a topic you are struggling with or you're having a challenge with. You just want to build the opportunities for them to come back to you and you to go to them as well. And then focus on the key takeaways at the end of the communications as well. That kind of summarizes what we're looking for. Again, it's not to catch anybody out, but just to help communicate. And another thing that can sometimes drive people nuts is if there's a group setting and they're called out on the spot, like, well, what's your opinion, Bill, about this? Some people like that. Some people would become overwhelmed and then begin to second guess why they were called out, things like that, when that wasn't the intention at all. So just know your audience is the bottom line with things like that. So when we look at emails, again, when writing emails, need to understand the context. There are generational differences and cultural landmines. Quick example I think is but they're using emojis, for instance, or being interpreted by different teams in different ways. Using capital letters in text messages, right? Using punctuation. Right? So you can look up all these things. Not going to go into it. But you can use emails for assignments. I find that very useful either to receive those myself or also in my following up with things. Because what it does there is it avoids any surprises. Also, when you receive an email or something, acknowledge it with a response. Again, it's just another way of anchoring communications, not meant as any sort of nefarious underscoring. And that's where there has to be the trust built in using that. But do use email and follow up with the summaries. And avoid not giving enough time to plan. So again, structured individuals, if there's something urgent that comes up. But what's maddening is a lot of times from a manager's perspective, these things have been boiling or known for months that they were coming up. Or every year the company goes through a planning cycle, right? So then to say things to a neurodiverse person like, hey, can you get me this in the next couple hours before lunch because I'm having a meeting and I need to present on something. Wow. We already knew that this was a monthly meeting or a quarterly meeting or a yearly or part of a big initiative. So try and avoid those. It's not always avoidable, obviously, but do try best. And then again, on that calling out, make sure that it's amiable, not something that's meant to catch them out. And you can do a forewarning to all the audience, for instance, like, hey, I'm just going to call on various people. And make sure that you are randomly selecting people. And another technique is you can just tell everybody, hey, you're allowed to pass if you don't want to answer this particular question. So providing additional support really comes about to there are other people that can help, mentors, and another thing that you can use as well is job shadowing and paired work, either paired work within the team, kind of building camaraderie, but you don't want to single out the individual just for that type of an arrangement, right? It's kind of like, well, I can't be trusted to work. No, making sure that everybody's on a rotation or something like that. Peer and mentoring support for yourself, for the individual as well. And then reteaching as well has to do with, we need to hear the same messages multiple times, say 7 times before something really begins to stick. And so always be a continuous learner and reinforcing that learning. Now let's take a look at the perspective as an employee. So I put up the book Surrounded by Idiots because it just tickled my funny bone when I saw that. This is not meaning that, the organizations that I work in are idiots by any stretch of the imagination. It's rather the things that, people come home at the end of the day and they dump with frustrations, right? And it's about, again, building that empathy and understanding of other people. And the color scheme here you can see is using the DISC model, but applied to work scenarios and settings. So it's a very entertaining read, I find, and helpful because, again, it takes the theory of, say, the DISC model and shows it interaction with various stories. And so it's a whole series of surrounded by bad bosses, right? They're not always bad bosses. They're just bosses, and how they could be kind of narcissists on the team, right? Energy vampires. Anyway, funny set. Just check it out. See if it's something that you're interested in. But again, that's just kind of why I put it up there. But employee considerations. So when we look at the workplace as well, so work, any employment is about teamwork. There is no I in teamwork, right? This isn't about me versus them, but it really is about them and us. So we need to manage our emotional response to make sure that we aren't winning the war and losing the battles. And it's also critical to not burn bridges with individuals. So we need to understand how to handle feedback that maybe we perceive as negative. And it's our responsibility as an employee to clarify it, to acknowledge, and to thank the person. At least it was brought up, right? So the worst thing is for things that are implied and secret, and then later on it comes up in some bigger negative way. So we want to appreciate feedback. So if you struggle with that, work on that, how to receive feedback and how to maintain the proper mindset. Also, business etiquette. We need to have open communication with managers, our supervisors, and also team members. That will help reduce anxiety. So if you don't have regular one-on-ones, you initiate those. Make sure that you have a list of your assignments and you follow up on them. Ask for feedback. Don't just wonder, what am I supposed to be working on? What is the order? Is this important? Right? So ask for that feedback continuously. It's ongoing. Every week you're asking yourself this question. So self-awareness is important. That's why the personality kind of assessments in different ways. So know what your skills are. Know my skills and document my successes. Other people, you look at an annual review. It's 12 months. Lots of days have transpired. Do you remember what happened 12 months ago? Maybe not, because you're focused on the here and now and future. So document those yourself. Seeing differences that you have and others as an asset, right? They're not idiots. Maybe your perception is seeing some weaknesses. That's a strength that you have. But look at those as an asset, right? The other people will have strengths where you do not. But again, your strengths is an asset. It's not a liability. Know your personal interaction weaknesses, being blunt or inconsiderate. And again, that varies based on culture. When I work in highly technical groups or in certain European cultures, they're very direct and very short with communications. It's fine. In some other organizations, again, working in Europe and with a highly creative team, those kind of communications get misinterpreted. And so it's kind of like, why are you being so rude? I was like, I wasn't trying to be rude. If I used bigger, more inclusive terminology in communications, emails especially, with technical groups, they wonder, why am I wasting their time? Right? Get to the point. So anyway, you just need to know your personal interaction weaknesses as well, and don't take it negatively either way. Know how to yield and to accommodate. So it's easy for a very structured person to be able to get very dogmatic about what they believe is the correct answer or the way forward. And sometimes we just have to give that up and go with what the group decision is, or how do we have the chance to engage and maybe influence the outcomes and direction. But you have to be self-aware of yourself and what are your triggers and how you react. And then very important is to have a confidant or advisor, a wing buddy, somebody third party that can provide perspectives and insights is very helpful. Not always available, because one of the other weaknesses is don't really build intimate friends that well, but knowing that self-awareness is something to work on. So reach out to others. Use the mentoring type programs as well to make new contacts and friends and rehash some of the issues and examples in a safe space as well. So get assistance from others as well. You need to manage your supervisor, your manager, right? There's the saying of managing your manager. So when you start with that process, again, self-awareness, understand your strengths and weaknesses, what you can contribute the most to maximize your superpowers, but don't fixate necessarily on your shortcomings. You want to be aware of them. No one's excellent at everything. Be realistic about that. Next thing is, look at your job description. If one doesn't exist, write one. Adapt one. What you really are doing there is kind of processing what expectations are. And by having it in a written job description, you can then clarify that with your manager. So sometimes, again, you may feel perfectly happy and your manager's telling you you're doing a great job. So you don't need to do this necessarily. But if you're not sure, or you get a new manager and all the rest of it, this helps you process that. The other thing is that competency model that I showed you. If your organization uses that, then go through that on your own and rate yourself and be honest about your blind spots, and then identify either things that you think your manager needs to provide some sort of accommodation about, like, I don't know, I don't get enough time in the week where I can block out external distractions and things like that to work on this. Can we discuss that, right? So you're using those to identify any kind of potential accommodation needs that you may need, or like it's too loud in the office, so I put my headphones on sometimes, noise canceling. Okay, is that okay? It might not be okay based on the type of work you do, but anyway. And then the other thing you need to do is, as mentioned earlier, find what sort of company resources you guys have for your mentoring programs or advocates, management and team engagement. When you send out communications, or your team, what are effective communication strategies, verbally, presentations, or written communications, and then also the mentors and advocate can really help you keep on track. Maybe you're getting overwhelmed. Can you have that other person help you kind of sort out where you are and talk through some of the things? And that's a very valuable input to get. So advocating for yourself, help your manager understand how best to support you. On the neurotypical spectrum, everybody's different, and again, there's cultural differences as well. They're not mind readers. They're not more clairvoyant. You need to self-identify. Now, this is a hard one for a lot of people. Go back to 75% don't do that. They don't want to be vulnerable, seen as weak or needy, whatever. But personally, I think that helps the other person understand. It's kind of like, oh, okay, that helps reset their mind and how to approach you, even if they have no idea. But that's why it's important that you help your manager. They can go to all the training they want, and they're going to talk about, generic approaches and strategies, but that may be not what you need. Then you clarify your communication needs. Maybe you like email, maybe you don't. Maybe you like conversations, whatever it happens to be. You also need sensitivity training. So ask your manager if they would be willing to attend neurodiversity sensitivity training or improvement. But in that, you may find a manager that says, oh, well, yeah, I would be interested, thank you, but they don't know what resources are available. So that comes back to you. You might need to do some research to help them help you. So with that, it's kind of, don't just bring them a problem, bring an answer, right? First, qualify. Are they interested? Would they actually appreciate this? And then if you do that, then follow through by being helpful. Then have regular check-ins. Again, that's where a lot of things can go off the rail in employee-manager relationship. So that helps relieve any potential anxiety. If you're feeling anxious about talking to your manager, there's either two things. Either, it's been a repeat issue and something needs to be addressed, but sometimes it's because of pulling back, right? So by having those, a lot of times it's like it deflates all the different mind analysis that we've had going on. Pessimism in our own minds just totally gets deflated. And ask the question, what am I doing well? So not how am I doing, right? Because then you may have them giving you some helpful, quote unquote, opportunities for improvement, but you want to know what, you build up your positive image as well. So what am I doing well in relation to that? And then you can go on to performance concerns of the manager. Ask them, do they have any? And if they do mention things, again, then ask for those concrete examples. Don't just leave it on the table. Sometimes you can be brushed with them in your communications or whatever. Ask them to help you. So important, keep all of these things in mind and don't just let it go. Now, into your strengths, another tool that a lot of organizations use is from 2001, Don Clifton was the CEO of the Gallup polling research company, and he decided that their organization to do interviews with top leaders and teams to find out, well, what are their attributes and strengths. And so that's where this comes from. So it doesn't really have effectiveness, and it may have been incorrect because it was self-reported, but nevertheless, it is very good for looking at personality preferences. But what it is not really that good at, or maybe in some other ways, would be communication styles and stuff. So just from my own personal experience, right? But they have the different categories: strategic thinking, relationship building, and influence, and executing. So if you have this tool or may be familiar with it within your organization, this is one that's used. But again, personally, I find it not as helpful as Myers-Briggs. I don't know, but of course in the HR and professional counselors, they're going to disagree with me on that. That's okay. Again, use what works best in the organization. But as an individual, this is a tool that you can use as well. Again, ask your HR department if they have that. And then another popular personality tool. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to. How'd that get in there? Anyway, so wrapping it all up a bit with takeaways for managers. Appreciate the differences. You want to focus on the strengths of your team members and be adaptive. So the tools you can use to help with that: Myers-Briggs, DISC, Clifton Strengths. Use the competency model, SCARF engagements. So use those tools. Effective communications. Use concise language. Understand the unreliability of body language and indications of distress or reflection is needed to temper. Look for some training and support from others. Help you as a manager to be able to deal with the different people in your teams and interactions with peers, and also members or mentors can help you in that as well. Takeaways for individuals. You're an employee. Everybody's an employee. Be self-aware. Again, understand your strengths and your limitations. Find buddies and mentors. Document your successes. Do some of your own psych assessments. They don't have to be perfect, right? If you do have access to clinical ones, wonderful, but I would say mix it up. Get different perspectives. Advocate for yourself. You are responsible in the workplace for being aware, making sure that you have the regular check-ins that you need, and as well as asking for the accommodations that you may need. And then open communications, again, with your supervisor and your team for feedback and tracking. So thank you very much again. Hopefully you found some of this of interest and help you with your own journey. So with that, here's my email address if you have any comments, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you.